I remembered it. Good evening and welcome to the January 2022 Piedmont Division meeting. People are beginning to pop in. Attendance is going up. The Board of Directors meeting just ended. Hopefully this will go away. This current edition of the pandemic will go away, and we'll be back at live, real, in-person meetings in February. But as we continue to set new records in Georgia for the current variant of COVID-19. Meeting in person just did not seem to be a very useful concept, but we're here. Please welcome, or hello to everybody who is here. The room is open, so people can get in. I'll leave it unmuted for just a little bit. Our new director of operations is on with us. Hello, Jim.
Jim?
No, sorry.
It's Tom.
Sorry, I'm lost. Tom, good evening, good morning, good whatever.
Okay.
It's been a long day.
Yeah, this would have been so much easier live.
Yes. Good morning, Tom.
Yeah. So you ready for me to go ahead and move into it, right?
I certainly am.
Sounds good. All right. Got a few things going on. First off, I wanted to thank Sally. I don't know if she's here, for doing an incredible job over the last couple of years, especially with the limitations and problems. She did an amazing job as director of operations. It's going to be kind of tough to fill in and pick up where she's doing, but I'm going to do my damnedest and probably screw up some. If I do, please bear with me. We have a number of things. Quickly, what's coming up? We have training camp and Golden Spike. Excuse me, the two big ones. We have the Golden Spike show, which is this Saturday, and Trains. And we'll discuss that. Gary will talk about that in a few minutes. The training camp that was scheduled for this month has been postponed. And it's going to be rescheduled, and everybody will be informed about that. We have clinics set up, fortunately, for much of the rest of the year, which is really good. But if anybody has any clinics they want to do, let me know, please, because I'm always open to adding more, because we do have like 3 empty slots left for this year, and I like to have spares. It's good to have an emergency clinic because sometimes things happen, and it's good to have a backup clinic. Next month, we've got Peter Youngblood is going to be doing a clinic called From Planning to Benchmark and Beyond, and expect it to be pretty good. It's going to be apparently the kitchen sink on about everything, so it looks like it ought to be a fun session. And March, and Walt will probably kill me, I think he's going to do something on the Savannah ports, and that's basically, I know he has to get a bunch of permissions, but he's going to do something, and it'll be good. In April, Jim and Christopher Davis will be doing a session on operating sessions and making them easy. And I'm going to stop at that particular point because I don't think we'll spend a whole lot of time going down the details. It's all going to be in the timetable. So to start off, let's see, Perry's already done any general announcements. If he has any more, you good now?
Perry. I'm good now. Please keep your eye open for training camp information, especially because our next one, if in particular, if you're interested in pursuing your AP certificate for civil engineer, the division was a group up in North Carolina was willed a very large collection, a substantial collection of fast tracks jigs. And the group that got them found no use for them and was going to pitch them in the garbage if we didn't accept them. And I couldn't quite see a nice collection of fast tracks jigs going into the garbage. So I accepted them, and I now have a nice collection of them that are going to be here as part of the training camp program. And for the AP program, I'm going to get a list of those out to Charlie, so he'll have them available for those wanting to work on their civil engineer AP certificates. And that's going to be the focus of a training camp probably in April. That's what we've got penciled in already. Thank you, Tom.
Sure. And one more thing, normally we'd be collecting $3 by passing a bucket. We have no bucket. There's no bit bucket to pass around. So you can go on our webpage and click a button and donate. And I know Barry set his up to where it's just recurring, and it puts $3 in the bucket every month. And you don't have to worry about bringing 3 singles or making change and all that other crapola. So I'm planning to do that. I just think it'd be a whole lot easier, and just go ahead and have it go straight in there. And it makes it a whole lot easier that we don't have to start counting money or anything like that. And it also helps the division's finances. Next up will be Gary Fish, talking about the trains and Golden Spike. If Gary's there. I see him.
Oh, Gary's there, and I've sent an unmute request to you, Gary. Okay, I've sent another unmute request to you, Gary.
It has now come through. Hi.
Hi.
I am now unmuted. I feel better. Thank you. Feel much better. For those of you who are interested, there is the Golden Spike Train Show is this weekend at the what's now the Gas South Energy Center. We have at this point 3 folks on for each of our 3 shifts, which is great. I'm very excited. We'll have enough folks to work. We can always use more folks if you want to have the opportunity to talk about the NMRA to the visitors at the show and what's available. We'd love to have you help us. Just if you can bring your badge, the hanging badge we got from Sally, and the orange badge, it would be great so they know who we are. And we'll have trains is coming up in a couple of weekends. I will have a sign-up genius coming out within the next 24 hours. I didn't want to cross over with this one. I felt if 2 of them went, and get everybody mixed up. So we'll be looking for a bunch of workers. There'll be a 2-day show. We have 3 different sections that we'll be needing workers at. So we'll be looking for 3 or 4 per shift. I'll have a chance to finish breaking those down today. I wanted to make sure we would still be on for the show before we sent it out. And so please sign up. We could use your help. We'll be needing a bunch of folks to help us at the passing the word on to the kids and their parents and grandparents who might be interested in joining us. So we'll be doing that in the very near future on Trains. Again, I look forward to seeing a lot of you live at the Golden Spike this Saturday, and everyone have a wonderful day.
And
Thanks, Gary.
Kennesaw is advertising it heavily, and they're advertising it as their biggest event, and it's kind of nice.
Whoa, fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks, Gary. And wow, I didn't know it was their biggest event. That's pretty cool. Jim Travis is up next. He's filling in for Hank Premis, who unfortunately had a death in the family, and he's out of town. And Jim has some information about the train show, which is going to be in March. That's pretty soon. Jim?
I've sent an unmute request to you, Jim. Or Walt. Jim, Walt, hello.
Ruh-roh.
Hey, Perry.
Yes.
Have you got me now?
Yes, we do.
Hey, good deal. All right, folks. right now we've got 9 vendors and 35 tables sold for our March show. We're hoping that as the month goes on, we're going to pick up a lot more sales. We need volunteers. We need a bunch of volunteers. So I'm asking everyone, if you're able to volunteer, please send Gary or me an email. And Gary's going to be putting out a sign-up sheet here probably within the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks, so we can get everybody on board. But I think we're going to have a great show this year, and we'll look forward to everybody on this broadcast volunteering. So I've got all of your names down, so I'll look for you on the sign-up sheet. Thanks much.
Thanks, Jim. And next up would be Charlie Mason about the achievement program. I know he's there somewhere.
I just gotta find him and there he is. I found him and I've sent him an unmute request. So Charlie, hello.
Put glasses on, Jim, so you can see what you're doing.
Charlie, are you there?
Calling Charlie Mason. You're up.
He may be having technical difficulties because I'm still seeing that there is a low bandwidth.
Well, I tell you what, why don't we go ahead and move on to Mike Deaton talking about the pilgrimage, because it was really good this year. Smaller, but good. And I'll let Mike talk about it.
Hey, I got my unmute request.
Yes.
So you can hear me now.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Just real quick, the pilgrim was very successful. Very pleased with the results, all things considered. I mean, it wasn't our usual, 80 layouts and thousands of people, but we still had a good one anyway, I think. First and foremost, I want to thank our host. I know I looked down the list of participants. I know a lot of you had your layout open to visitors. If you are expecting your participation stars for your certificate that you have hanging on your wall, and you should, I had planned to bring those to the meeting tonight. Can't do that, but I'm going to bring them next month. If you are at the meeting next month, I will have your participation star and a nice little thank you note for your participation this year. And if you can't make it, or we don't have an in-person meeting, I will mail them out in February. If anybody needs one before then, send me a note, let me know, I can get it to you sooner. But that is my plan for now. It's trying to save that postage. We'll get them handed out in February. We can recognize you for participating. And if not, we'll get them to you by mid-February. Just real quick, the numbers that we had for the 19th annual Piedmont Pilgrimage, we had 33 open houses. We had 6 virtual tours via videos. For the open houses, we had over 1,300 participants signed in, which is, again, not as much as usual, but not bad. Probably in line with what we were expecting. It was almost about, very close to about 40 people per tour. So that was a good manageable number. We didn't have 80 and 90 people showing up, filling up basements, but then we didn't have, I think, 25 might have been a small turnout. Most people at least had that many, unless they were way out in the frontier somewhere. But all in all, I think it was very well attended. I appreciate those of you who got around to see the layouts, and several people made an effort to see a lot of layouts. So thank you for doing that. For the videos, the 6 videos that we had, we've already recorded as of the end of the year. End of last year, we had 3,300 views. So that's an average about 550 views per layout. So that's, again, not quite as many as last year when all the tours were by video, but still a very respectable number, and very pleased with that. So all I can say is thank you to my committee who helped organize and arrange everything and make it happen in all the different categories we had there. We had people bought pike ads. Appreciate you doing that. Thanks again for going to the tours and participating with them. So just a reminder, next year, or I'm sorry, I should say later this year, it will be the 20th annual Piedmont Pilgrimage. And we're really looking forward to that. So we hope to be back to normal, having our usual slate of open house layout tours. And we'll probably keep doing some videos as long as there's some interest in that as well. So I hope everybody got to get out and see some layouts or watch some videos or both. Thank you again for your support and your participation. And look for your stars, hosts. Those will be coming to you next month. That's what I got.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. Is it anybody seen you hiding their hair of Charlie?
Yeah, Tom, I should be unmuted now.
You're good. You're good.
Yeah,
You're up.
had some problem getting unmuted. I'm Charlie Mason, the Achievement Program Chairman for the division. And we were scheduled to have both a photo and a model contest tonight. But since we had to go to a virtual meeting, we have postponed both the model contest and the photo contest probably until March or April, when hopefully we'll have in-person meetings again. So we'll give you a little more time to work on your model structures, cars, locomotives, and think about working on an entry for the contest. If anybody has models that they would like judged for merit awards before the model contest, if they will contact me, I have a committee of judges, and we'll be glad to arrange a time and a date to do the judging of your models. Now, as far as the achievement program itself, we have had members earn some awards here in the last several months. Mike Cummings has earned the author certificate, and I presented that certificate to Mike at the December Christmas party, but we just didn't announce it to the division. So this makes Mike's 6th certificate. So he is 1 certificate away from becoming a master model railroader. So congratulations, Mike. As a result of the Piedmont pilgrimage, I always keep a lookout for people who have layouts that fulfill all the requirements for the Golden Spike Award. And so in the last several months, we've had 6 people earn the Golden Spike Awards. Those are Randall Watson, Larry Lamis, Mike Bridgewater, Gary Fish, Stefan Bartelski, and Ken Stinnett. I have given most of the people their certificates, but Stefan, I know, is probably watching. I have your certificate, Stefan, and we will get it to you at one of these meetings. And Ken Stinnett, I still have to present the certificate to Ken, but we'll get it to Ken one of these days. So if you're interested in working on any of the AP certificates and you need some help or information, be sure to give me a call. And as Perry mentioned, we're going to set up a training camp in April for using our newly acquired Fast Tracks jigs to scratch build turnouts for use with the civil certificate. So keep an eye out for an announcement and sign up for that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Charlie. As far as I know, from my being a bit of a neophyte doing this, that's all the announcements. So unless somebody else has one that comes up, if you have announcements or anything for that I need to make that I'll call on you at the meeting, please let me know. I've have an email address set up on the Piedmont division, and it's a long one. It's Tom Gordon, Piedmont division, whatever. You can send it easy enough as T Gordon for the membership. I'm not worried about it. T Gordon, TGORDON at mindspring.com, and that works fairly well. I have a long Piedmont division email, and it's mainly so when the screen scrapers come out and start grabbing email addresses off our webpage and sending me tons of junk, I'll know I can scroll through it and delete 90% of the crap that's there and find what's good. But that's why there's several email addresses for me. Plus I have a bunch of other ones too, but that's irrelevant. Tonight unless there's anything else, I'm planning on moving on to the clinic. Perry, you're good?
Yeah, I'm good.
I haven't screwed up anything too much yet, or
No, not that I know of. I've sent an unmute request to your speaker for the evening, so.
okay. Tonight we got Peter Thomas. He has a pretty interesting presentation on operations, and it's Operations 101, I believe is the title of it. And the neat thing is he goes to he talks about the different positions and the different parts and things you need to do on the railroad, and how traffic's generated, all kinds of good stuff. And he's even improved it, I understand, from the last version I saw. So what I'll do is turn it over to Peter, and we'll see you on the other side of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Tom. So I'm going to do the electric string thing. So if folks want to close their eyes and imagine we're in the meeting room, folks are walking up and down the room and switching microphones and all that other good stuff. I'm going to stop my video, start the share, go to that one, click share, go up to view and do full screen mode. And Tom or Perry, can you come back to me to confirm you can see my presentation?
I most certainly can. And as a general announcement for people who are attending, we will open it for general questions at the end. If something pops up in your brain that's really pertinent or urgent, you can always go down into the chat session and type in a chat message, and I can always forward it on to Peter while the presentation is going on. But we will have plenty of time for questions at the end of Peter's lively presentation.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So Operations 101, or running trains to bring a model railroad to life using role play, simulation, and puppetry. And before I explain that terminology, I'd like to spend a few moments introducing myself. So I started railroad modeling here in the USA about 3-4 years ago, and was invited to join the board of directors last year as a director at large. My model is modular and is an HO short line joining Tate to Gainesville, and you can see a photo there of the models up on their stack, which is currently about 3 feet to my left. Although obviously we all model, I've actually developed key interests in planning. I work as the CAD draftsman for train installations. Many of you may know Dave Bennett. So when he wants a precise diagram for his installations, he'll get me to do the computer thing. And Jim Dacker was kind enough to work with me to put an article on my research for planning into the newsletter a month or two back. My other interest has been operations, because as I started getting into the learning curve of US operations, I realized it was nothing like the block system used in the UK. So this presentation represents my findings and research into that topic. Role play. So there are many games and activities which involve role play. Basically, you use the activities and the documents of what's done in the prototype to bring your model to life. And the most obvious example is you drive the locomotive. And as a point to note, there's a time associated with this role play, and that'll become important as we get towards the end of the presentation. So I ask you to tuck that away for a moment. Puppetry. This is using the human hand, often referred to as 050, and is doing what can't be done in our model, no matter how good we are, although the likes of Arduinos, which I'm sure Tom will be happy to tell you more about, do allow us to do something. And simple examples here are loading and unloading, coupling up, coupling, etc. So what's the jam in the sandwich? Simulation, gameplay. It's a substitution of what's not being modeled. So typically that involves picking from a list, drawing a card. And one example of this I came across was in the real model, in the real prototype world, various hazards happen, and we can introduce that into our modeling by having a card calling out a specific hazard. Again, in the game world, typically a quantity is decided by rolling a dice. I'm not suggesting that modeling your railroad becomes something like a Las Vegas casino, but you have to have a way of mimicking what would happen in the real world that you can't do. And inevitably, some of you may have heard of JMRI, which is a computer system which will perform a lot of this simulation. So, as a layout owner, if you're going to do operations, you have a whole bunch of decisions to make as to what you're going to do with role play, what you're going to do with simulation, and what you're going to do with puppetry. So as a simple, trivial example, if you will, kids here are playing with their Brio wood train set, and they're pretty much all into puppetry. It's all 050. But bear in mind, as soon as someone says choo-choo, then they've started into role play. So there's always a bit of both going on. On the right-hand side here, I've got an example of a dispatchers panel, and that's pretty much full-on role play. They have to know a lot about the prototype rules. They have to know how to use the appropriate prototype documentation, and they have to work with a bunch of people out on the layout who, again, have signed up to following the rules, etc. So we have simulation in there providing the glue between the role players and the operators on the layout, but the balance is very different between these two scenarios, and that's the big decision for the layout owner. And hopefully, as we proceed with this presentation, it'll become clearer as to what you're doing and why. So here's an overview of running trains. Starting in the top left, we have loads. They go into cars. Cars eventually go into trains. Train islands are run in the operating system. They go along a route, which is a sequence of locations. And if we're going to stop folks running into each other, we have to have some train authority system. And anyone familiar with Charlie Mason's world of AP will know that for the dispatcher certificate, you're going to need to know about string charts, timetables, and clocks, our time thing again. So what I'm going to do now is go into each of these topics in a bit more detail, and hopefully that's going to give you some insight. Loads. Most importantly, loads fall into two flavors. There's the visible kind, and those of you getting the NMRA magazine will be familiar with the load of the month, and that's some interesting modeling. And equally well, locations will be unique to each layout, but typically are our spurs, our freight depots, our yards, etc. In particular, a load is something a customer wants picked up or dropped, and that's done at a location. So a location is where we can interact with our customer, or where we can allow the cars needed by the customers to be passed from one train to another to eventually get to their end location. And as I've tried to make this research as comprehensive as I can, I realize, of course, that some of our locations are what we need to run the railroad. Then we have the unique to modeling, where in the prototype, all locations are real, but we have the decision of what locations we have on our layout and which are off our layout. And then you get into the issue of simulating the customer role and simulating what's happening off the layout. And we'll be going into that a bit more detail later on. So customers, industries at each location have their associated loads. And I realized as I went into this that that was really the first step in understanding how I was going to bring the railroad to life, because I would have to understand for each industry what they were going to want in the way of loads, therefore cars, therefore what cycle that car would go through, and when I was going to get to end of job. And that opened, if you will, a big can of worms in terms of, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens in American industries which don't happen in England, so I've got some research to do here. Cars, as you will all know, come in a whole bunch of flavors. And I think last time I looked at the various codes you can assign to car types in the modern world with the special variants, there's now 50, 60, maybe even more. You'll have less than that on your layout, but nevertheless, it's appropriate to do some research and thinking as to which is an appropriate car to carry the load, which cars can carry different loads, and whether you're going to go into the complexity of cars being for exclusive use of a single customer, or it's your railroad, your rules, your cars, you'll do with them what you want, or whether you are simulating the rules and practice whereby the railroads allowed each other to use their other cars, and what the rules were therefore for returning those cars to where they came from. And that in itself is almost a topic for another presentation. So we need to assign the loads to the cars, and that's sometimes referred to as a car forwarding system. It's sometimes referred to as a traffic management system. The key thing is, because you ain't got customers, you want to start simulating what that activity is going to look like so you can run the appropriate trains. So you could, as I said a few minutes ago, start throwing dice to decide how many boxcars you're going to put on the train, or you can set up some sort of schedule for each of the location spots as to how often, or whether it's a repeating cycle of their orders. And then in particular, when it arrives by train at the location, what you're going to do about loading and unloading, where the load is visible, and then how you're going to update your traffic management system, bearing in mind, although you might have several people operating your layout, you haven't got all the clock, the computer systems, and all the other stuff that the prototype railroads have. And so again, over time, folks have developed Waybill systems where you flip the car between sessions. GMRI has got various programs which allow your perhaps conductors to update the system. There's options there, but as you start developing this operating system, you've got to make your decisions as to how you're going to do this. And again, the more you research into it, the more sort of variations there are, and it's all covered on what I call the topic of simulation. It took me a while to work out where the empty cars were coming from, and then I realized, hang on, there's space in yards or in unused spurs or passing sidings under the control of railroad where these things get parked, and then there's a whole process and documentation, car orders, which enable the yardmasters when they come to build their trains to know that they've got to go fetch an empty and add it to this train. Then you get into the simulation of actually running the train, and in particular your train crew, your conductor, from the waybills or other documentation, can build a switch list either in their heads or actually for real. Routes. So in the case of Amtrak, where their load is a passenger, they've decided with the constrictions that Congress give them that these are the best routes that will enable to maximize the traffic, the loads they can move. And this website is interesting. I like to indulge to see how many hours the Crescent is running today. For your layout, and every layout is probably unique in terms of you have your own unique set of locations, so therefore you have your own set of routes, and based on therefore your track plan and stops, etc., and how you're using your staging, you can come up with a bunch of routes to run your trains. And the key trick I discovered while doing this research was the schematic, or if you will, control boundary layout is a very useful input to that process. And I hope that your schematic is not as complicated as the London Underground, which I realized when I was putting this together at one point, I had about half in my head, but that's a story for another day. So let's change tacks a little bit here. We've looked at the composition of the train and where it's going, but of course not all trains are equal. And depending on their loads will depend on which type of train you need to run, and depending on the cars and the loads may wish to include in your operating scheme what you're going to do about cabooses, what you're going to do with car positions, or whether you're just going to make life simple and simulate the train customer requirement by just picking half a dozen trains at random from your storage and sticking them behind a locomotive. There are all sorts of options out there. As you go into the research, you'll find rules and documents and so forth. You can keep it very simple, or you may decide you want something more complex. And I realized that the train types you can run is not restricted by the size or necessarily the complexity of your layout. Pretty much a layout like mine with nothing much more than a, excuse me, a spur and a passing siding can run a whole bunch of through trains of different flavors, can run a whole bunch of through freights of different flavors. And most importantly, they can run the local or turn, which will bring cars that can be switched during the operation. And then, of course, we have the funnies like work trains, which will probably be an invitation to do some more puppetry. And there's other stuff as well. So again, research and decisions as to what trains, excuse me, you want to run on your layout. So a train then, we've said, has a type, it has a route, and if you're going to run more than one of them, it's going to have a sequence or a time. You're going to need one or more locomotives of the appropriate type. And you're going to need this shopping list, if you will, of cars that need to travel that route based on the locations and the industries, etc. Your locomotives are stored in the depot, the roundhouse, etc. That may or may not be on your layout. You may or may not want to have a role play of a hostler who is moving the locomotives around and doing the necessary puppetry to mimic what happens in the real world. But I would remind you that if you're going to be realistic, and those of you who follow Thomas the Tank Engine will know in one story, Gordon is very adamant that he is an express locomotive and there's no way he's going to pull the local train. And so you can select the appropriate type, but you can do it at random if you wish. Again, a decision by the layout owner. You can build the trains on the layout in the classification yard. You can build them off the layout. That gives you a bit more freedom to do the puppetry. You can decide whether you want to get sophisticated with how many, I should say, in the way of cars you're going to put on your train, bearing in mind length and theoretical weight. You can have a simple, what you see is what you get, or you can go into blocking, so that given the route the train is going to follow, that will determine the sequence of the cars. And in particular, if you're running passenger trains, then you can have the complexity of head or tail end traffic, so baggage cars or reefers or whatever. But pretty much, unless you're running something at random, you're gonna need some sort of documentation to give to the train crew so they know what's in the train and what they're going to do with it. And here you can see a photo of the Waybill system that Micromark took over from the pioneers, and that's a common way that many layout owners use to achieve that. Caboose. Wouldn't you know it, even this, if you are going to mimic what the prototype does realistic, has a bunch of rules, and therefore, depending on what you've got in the way of available caboose rolling stock and how complex you want to make running your railroad, you may or may not to introduce this stuff as well. So in the last few minutes, I've covered quite a broad church of stuff. We looked into loads and realized that that in the prototype world is what starts the train running off. That's why the railroad exists. But for us, for doing the modeling, we can to some extent rather more focus on the cars and deciding what we want to run from that perspective. Locomotives and caboose, we talked briefly about whether how sophisticated you want to make that assignment process. And then depending on your train types, you will then have your trains that are going into your operating session. Location and routes, again, that's layout specific, and there's a bit of research to be done there to enable you to decide what you want to do. So this is perhaps a good point to pause momentarily. Perry, have we got any questions coming in you want to cover so far?
No,
Or are
sir,
you
not
happy
yet.
that I carry on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So let's look in a bit more detail at the job. The train crew, understanding their route, understanding how permission to proceed will be given, understanding whether they're responsible for setting and clearing switches or whether that's being done by, for example, a role-playing dispatcher. Train crew knowing what to do about meets and overtakes, and again, depending on what role playing you're following will depend on what rules and permissions you will need to follow. And this stuff ain't trivial. Typically, certainly in the back of the days of steam, nobody was allowed to drive a locomotive over a route until they'd spent a whole bunch of time as a fireman. And then I believe it's still practiced today on most railroads across the world that you cannot drive your own train over a route until you've been supervised or witnessed it being done by somebody else. There's a lot of safety issues at stake here. And on model trains, life is simpler, but nevertheless, if you just allow anarchy, it's when, not if, you're going to have a cornfield meet. Time on location. Passenger trains are going to stop and, in reality, wait for passengers to get on and off. You might do a bit of puppetry, but typically you're just pausing. I will warn you of a tale I heard whereby layout owner had a real train engineer operate for the first time, and before the train was due to leave, the guy was stood there doing nothing. "What are you waiting for?" he asked. "I'm waiting for the brake line to get under pressure." Simulation. In particular, of course, the key thing the train crew are going to do is any pickups and drop-offs. I call that micro operations. I'm going to come on to that in my next slide. And then your train crews on arrival, you as layout owner are going to want them to do a bunch of specific things. So again, they ain't going to do it unless you've created instructions for them to follow. And in particular, if you're combining engineer and conductor, then you're going to have railroad specific instructions here, because the prototype, those are very two distinct separate roles. Micro operations. So this is what you're doing to achieve the pickups and drops. And when I started researching operations, I was a bit of alarmed that the first couple of clinics that I found, I thought, oh, good, you know, I'm not the first one to want to solve this problem. Spent a huge number of slides and detail telling me how to switch a train into a facing spur. Kind of get it. The first time you do it, it's a bit of a challenge, but as you've seen, there's a whole lot more to operations that you as a layout owner are going to have to get covered before you can get folks operating, or before you can present the layout to perhaps visitors at a train show to enable them to see what you're doing. I think we've pretty much covered that. And sequence. So as you've identified that you want to run more than one train of varying types over your layout, you have to make the decision of what sequence do I want to run them in. And I've got to re-find a fabulous article that I believe was published in Model Railroad 30, 40 years ago, where the guy there made the point that the prototype has their arm behind their back in terms of what they have to run when to meet the demands of the customer. But on our model railroad, we don't have that constraint. So we may want, particularly if we're showing our trains on a pilgrimage or an exhibition, to come up with a sequence which is more entertaining to the viewer or more of a challenge for the operator. So again, there's a couple of thoughts for you. But again, you can just run them how you feel, but that may not be bringing the best out of your layout. So if we document the traffic plan, that will bring the sequence to life. And I've gathered that it's all too easy to come up with a sequence that ends up overwhelming what you're trying to do on an operating session. Perhaps because the guys need too much of a hard time break to catch a beer and catch up on the world, but whatever. Most folks seem to do this by trial and error, but as a mathematician, that horrifies me. So I'm still researching that area. And if folks have any ideas, I welcome them. Meets and overtakes will happen if you're running stuff at the same time. So you're going to need the rules, and that may impact on the sequence you decide to run. Again, you want to avoid having your crews wait for an excessive time. I gather from trains magazines I've read that back certainly before the days of computerization, crews had no objection whatsoever to spending a fair amount of time doing a lot of nothing because it was good for the pay packet. But our constraints are different. So the method that's been developed in the prototype world for deciding how to manage this issue of meets and overtakes is the string chart. Basically, that's just plotting as a graph the location on one axis against the time on the other. And of course, the mathematically literate amongst you will appreciate that where the lines cross is where there has to be a passing place. And then you can start working out, therefore, the arrival and departure time. Here's a string chart I pinched from BNSF. I had hoped to share the one I had from Japan Railways, which was even more horrible. I've seen examples in Model Railroader articles and like, which are much, much simpler. Yours will be what it is based on your layout and what you've done in the way of model compression to decide how many miles, quote unquote, there are between your various locations. So there's a bit of fudging and adjusting to do, and I'll be very happy to help anybody build a string chart that needs to. You then document that string chart typically as a timetable. So we have our locations and mileage down the middle, and then in each column we have our train with the time that it's going to arrive and depart at each location. And then that then becomes the document that your train crews can use to run their train appropriately, with the challenge that's been with engineers since time immemorial of running your train to meet the necessary times, as well as doing it safely. So I gather there's a question about where can you find string charts for fallen flags. There may not be one. You have to keep in mind that the vast majority of American railroads actually ran very, very few trains. If you only have one locomotive in steam, in power on your railroad, you don't need a string chart, because he's got the road. It's only when you've got, you know, multiple trains and you know, a complexity such that doing the simple obvious of starting them from both ends and working out where the midpoint is, okay, that's the passing place. You need the string chart. Time. I've mentioned a couple of times as we've gone through this that if you're role playing, you need a certain amount of time to do what you're doing. The challenge comes that if you're doing some reasonably complicated switching in a yard to achieve the necessary blocking, that's going to take something pretty close to what they need in the real world, i.e. 1-to-1. But if you're running fast straights or passengers where you've compressed your layout to eliminate a lot of the long runs through the countryside, they need a time, quite sure which way around you phrase it, speed it up or slow it down, so that the clock says they've taken 15 minutes to get from A to B, even though on the layout it only took them, say, 5. So depending on what role play you have going on will drive what freedom you have to set your fast clock appropriately, or what you want to do with your fast clock so that your operators are not sat around doing nothing. And off the clock between operating sessions, depending on how you decide to do things, that may be one session run to another, or there may be a bunch of time happening, a quantum leap, where you're rearranging a bunch of stuff in the staging yards so that the next session can proceed, which in real world would have been several days activity. The thing I realized as I was researching this and trying to get my head around what I as a layout owner and others would need to do to enable them to bring it to life was I would need lots of lists as a starting point. And here's a summary of that in this slide. And I haven't seen any real sort of hard and fast rules, unless you do it this way, you're going to get into trouble. So the only caveat I would put on this is if you're going to use, for example, JMRI, then it is expecting a list of cars and it has restrictions on what fields it must have and what order they'll need to be if you're going to load it up from what you've created offline. So I would share that warning with you. And again, as we've mentioned a few times going through this, your train crew need some documentation. The prototype uses waybills, which are absolute key documents because at the end of the day, they'll be used to build the customer. But you may decide to shortcut that by putting the key information on what you will call a switch list or a manifest. They need to know where to drive their train. They need to know when to go. And they'll need specific instructions, which may be pretty brief, or, you know, certainly for the new guys, you may want to make fairly comprehensive, you know, maybe even best part of a day. As DCC became more popular, folks realized it was handy to have a variant of the Waybill car card that became a locomotive card. So that seems quite useful. And again, I mentioned hazards here to try and introduce a bit of variation in the way that the trains are run. So hopefully that wasn't too quick, has given you a bit of insight as to what the steps are in running the train, and therefore what decisions as a layout owner you're going to need to make, what lists you're going to need. There's my contact email. Like Tom, I've got that organized so it'll sort the wheat from the chaff. Any questions or discussions?
Peter, the first question that popped in was from one of our members, would like some examples of bill of lading cards. Consignee is the recipient, shipper is what it says. The routing and via entries on those cards can be a puzzle. I use my via one way. Somebody else you might use them a different way, but maybe that's something that we could pull together, would be examples and turn them into a PDF or something that we could post out or email out or include someplace somewhere.
So I'd like to share a couple of thoughts immediately on that, Perry.
Okay.
Bear in mind that there's sort of two aspects to this. The first is your train crew does not care what the end destination is of the load car. They only care where they need to take their train to. Your traffic management system only cares if it's kind of all joined up because you've made it that sophisticated, that where a load needs to go through multiple trains, that the vias are appropriate so that they get stepped from one train to the next. So your starting point for all of this is, okay, what's your map of the railroad world for all of the traffic that's going to run on your layout?
Yep.
You simply blinkered and you're running just the local, so as long as you know where the two ends of the line are, you're done? Or are you using some interchange tracks, some interchange yards, and therefore your layout runs in a context of a bigger world? So again, going to trains.com or other numerous resources, you'll find the actual railroad plan, of which your layout then becomes, the little highlighted red line in the middle. Or if you are a fictitious railroad, then you need some fictitious geography to draw your plan. But your schematic or your plan is your starting point, because any and every bit of documentation you look at which mentions the location should make sense on that map.
Yep. The next question that popped up was, you mentioned a saw by, or a saw or saw by, and I've seen a saw, but I'm not sure I can adequately describe how a passing train saws by another one when the siding is too short.
That's right. It describes the scenario where one of the trains will not fit completely into the passing siding. So most of it's there, but some of it's still hanging out on the main. So how are you going to do the zig and zag to somehow shuffle them past each other to then enable them both to proceed on their way?
Yeah, and I'm not sure how
I've
to
seen two or
describe
three
how
clinics that
how you.
supposedly explain it, and I ain't solved it yet.
Oh, yeah, I haven't solved it. I've seen it done, but I'm not sure how to solve it. And maybe someone would like to type in a response, or
And therefore, the lesson as a layout owner is, guys, if you don't want your operators to end up in a mess, don't start building trains that are too long to fit on your layout.
no kidding.
But if you've got an operator crew that you're getting really fed up of being know-it-all, that's the one to throw in as the hazard.
True. Go off and look for timetables for your favorite fallen flag. and comments from people that it was a good presentation, and I agree.
The challenge with timetables is that, again, with American railroads, they are awfully boring.
True.
I mean, the Crescent Railroad timetable is one train a day in each direction, which took, from the UK, that took a bit to get my head around, because my local station runs something like 10 trains an hour for about 15 hours a day. The key thing is here, you want to run something which, if somebody's looking at it, if you will, from a rivet counter perspective, doesn't look obviously unprototypical. But on the other hand, you ain't going to get many folks turning up to operate your layout if in a 4-hour session they get to run one train for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Don. Don just posted an example of a dispatcher sheet.
Oh, good lad. Yeah. I mean, as I've been doing this research, it's fascinating to find the various prototypical documents and the rules around them, and therefore work out how, well, okay, can I just lift this and use this as is? Or is it more a case of, no, I've got to go back to first principles, work out what trains I want to run, what trains I want to run in which sequence, and then come up with the appropriate documentation in the right sort of style of a prototype, so that I'm giving the information unambiguously.
Stephen just wrote up a description of a saw by, at least the first part of it, and that must be, and his first requirement, one train must fit in the passing siding. True.
I would go re-emphasize, this is 101.
Yeah.
Almost every slide in my presentation, we could do a half-hour presentation on the detail within that slide.
Oh,
What
yeah.
I wanted to try and do was to give folks a landscape into which they could then put their research, put their documents, and work out, okay, for my layout, what do I want to do?
I think I'm gonna have to try a saw by on my railroad and visualize it for myself, because I've got some spots where I could run a shorter train into a passing siding and then meet a longer one. When the shorter train has entered the passing area, it stops short of the exit. The exit for the longer train is now free. Ah, okay. Um, Peter, are you willing to share your presentation?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And I've added a bunch of notes in the presentation, which includes links off to some videos I found helpful, some blog discussions, etc., etc. So absolutely, I'll be happy to share that. At the risk of stating the obvious, when the new website's are up, I'll know exactly how to do that. I'm not quite sure how best we do that in between now, short of folks sending me an email, and I'll send it via the electric string.
And Peter's email is in the presentation, is in the meeting, in his presentation, and the meeting is recorded. So you'll be able to look up his email address, if nothing else, that way.
Or if folks want to write it down now, Peter 329-2004 at gmail.com.
Type it into chat.
I can do that.
People can read it.
Nope. That shift key. Okay, there it is in the chat. Yeah, very happy to share because as I said, this is a result of my research and I know that there's some holes.
Okay, any other questions or?
Peter, Peter,
Oh,
you didn't send it to everybody, maybe.
yeah,
Ah.
you sent it just to me. I'll copy it and paste it to everybody.
Okay, thanks, mate.
Yep.
All
Thanks.
right.
Yeah.
That was some serious food for thought. I came across now. So anybody wants to cut and paste, go for it.
I just dropped it into the chat for everybody.
This gave me some food for thought because I thought, having the route thing and layout still, I don't want to say into construction, but I haven't really started operating. I'm just doing backdrop painting right now. So that's anyway, good. That was quite good. And we'll have more presentations on operations coming up too, because that's the fun part when you start getting everybody together when we can finally get together and operate layouts and have a bunch of fellowship and a good time and do some stuff and enjoy it. As far as I know, that's really kind of wraps us up. Next month, Peter Youngblood is going to be doing a really good presentation. If you haven't ever seen any of his presentations, you really want to see one of his presentations. He's good. He puts on a good show, and I seriously hope it's live because then it becomes some serious fun. But he has a lot of good insight on stuff. And hopefully it's live next month. If it's not going to be live, we'll give you adequate warning, or we'll actually give you adequate warning on whether it'll be live or not. And we'll know where to go from there. And hopefully this stinking virus can go away for a while and let us be normal for at least a short period of time. So that's all I have. Unless anybody else has anything left, I will hopefully see you guys next month, hopefully live. So with that, good night.
Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks,
You're
Perry.
welcome.
Peter, that was great.
Thank you.
Good evening, Roy.
Hello. How are you?
Good, sir, and yourself?
Not bad, not bad.
Very good. Saw that you popped in, tried to send you a message, and it didn't work very well, and now you're gone.
I'm still here.
Oh, okay. Oh, there you are. You're up at the top. You moved.
I do that occasionally. I slide away.
Oh, that's fun.
How's everything going?
What day is it?
I think it's Thursday.
Oh, good. Then it's going really, really well because I only have one more day of work left this week. Oh my goodness.
No, it's not Thursday, it's Thursday. FRS.
Oh,
I made up
rats.
day.
Oh well. We're going to be working with you so we can put on a good convention in 2023.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to get back to conventioning.
Yeah, me too. So
Yeah, I heard from Walt that you got it set up for in September. So
yeah, and he'll put together a committee, and we will end up at the convention center in Cartersville, and it's a nice place, and they are really great people. I'm so happy that that our show is there, and we'll be there in 2 months, and that's going to be nice.
Yeah, I liked it whenever I went down to the